This conference will now be recorded.
So really happy for everyone who could join us for this evening's webinar. We're going to talk about an important topic that affects a segment of our population, people who own land. And the title is Protect Your Investment with Soil Health. And the investment we're talking about here is obviously the land that landowners own. And for this evening's discussion, we're going to focus on those who do not farm that land, but who have other people that they've arranged with, contracted with, leased to, that take care of that land. And I am keenly aware that there are several different types of landowners. Maybe I'll back up first and say that I'm also aware that on our webinar this evening, we have those who actually own land and rent or lease to other farmers. We also have quite a few agency folks or people who influence both farmers and landowners potentially. So I do understand there's kind of a broad range of representations here this evening. And just as a little bit of I guess a background on me, I'm going to share a little bit here at the onset, but I am a farmer. So I'm going to give you some of my perspective of this. We have two other webinars in the coming weeks that we're going to be talking about some other aspects of this topic. But yeah, so there's a couple different type of landowners, and some who really do care about the soil health of their land, their investment, and others who care more about the money they get than the soil health part. And we're going to talk about that later on. And there's of course some people that might be in between as well. But I want to just to share that a little bit, just so you can give a little bit of background. But a little bit of my background. So I started no-till, or not plowing my field, not tilling my fields, back in 1982. Unfortunately, I did not take a picture in 1982, but I'm using this picture to represent this because this was taken in my neighbor's field, literally 100 feet away from my field. I'm going to show you that in a second. And this was my son about 10, 12 years ago. But you can just see that is a ditch. It is on a 12% slope. It might not look like in that picture, but this is why I get into no-till. And if any of you own land and you see this on your land, you don't have to be much of a farmer to know that this is not good. And we're losing that precious resource that we have. Not only that, where's it going? It's going into our streams, waters, waterways, lakes, rivers. A lot of us are from the Chesapeake Bay region, and we all know about the issues with that. So I like to say what goes on the farm should stay on the farm, and that's what we're trying to do here. So just to give you a little comparison to that picture, this picture was taken just minutes or just 100 feet away. At the same time, we had a torrential summer thunderstorms that came through, and this is my no-tillage tomatoes planted into rolled down cover crops that were rolled down. I'm going to show you a picture of a roller here in a second. So wouldn't you rather have this picture? Wouldn't you rather have this farm? Of course, because we're keeping the soil in place. And it's just, again, a little bit of background information for our topic. So again, a little bit about me. I developed the first cover crop roller in the United States in the mid 90s. And that has now become quite popular, literally worldwide. I did learn about it from the South Americans. That's where I got the idea. And then I fabricated this machine here to work. And now it's getting more and more popular all the time. It definitely has its niche for this here this area. The other thing I wanted to say by way of introduction is very much involved with cover crops, and I started working with Dr. Ray Weil from the University of Maryland, who some of you probably know, back in 2001. Actually, I started working with Ray in 1995, doing some cover crop research, so we go way back. But the radish cover crop has become very popular. around the world. This is actually the very first fields where it was planted in on my farm. So it was just being a part of the innovation of that has been it's been quite a journey for me in that. Now, just to show you a little bit how my fields used to look, this picture is over 30 years old, and there's we used to grow squash for Mrs. Smith Pie Company, and they you can see how my soil has lots of stones and soil was eroded, and it just was the way we farmed. We didn't really know any better. Uh, However, now we want to try to keep our soil covered with living roots all year long. That is what we want to do. This picture depicts that. And I'm not going to get too technical on you from a farmer's perspective, but the soil is covered. We try to keep it covered year round. We try to keep living roots in it year round because that's the way nature was designed to function. No matter where you're at on this earth, your soils were formed by multiple species and had living roots in the soil at all times. And this is pretty much the fundamental principle that I go by in the regenerative agriculture movement, which I'll just use that term a little loosely here because it means different things, but we probably all heard of sustainable agriculture. But regenerative agriculture is maybe more the label you could put on me now if you want to know my approach. We're trying to keep the soil covered, use as least tillage as possible, use multiple species with our cash crops and our cover crops, and keep living roots in the soil at all times. So this is just a fundamental principle. And you need to understand this because this is what we're trying to achieve here when we talk about protecting our investment of the soil. And regardless if you're a farmer or if you're a landowner, you want to protect that investment, you want to enhance it. One of the things that is important, and I show this slide to farmers all the time because it kind of makes them think, but I think you'll find this relevant. You can't buy soil health. It has to be made. You can't go down to the local store, the farm store, and buy soil health. Oh yeah, you can buy products that maybe will aid in soil health. And you can buy machinery, like here's a corn planter planting into a cover crop of hairy vetch, and there's rollers underneath that planter you can't see. It's a very modern, high-tech planter here. Lots of tools on here, but it's the management of that that is really making this work. In this scenario here from this picture, this farmer will be able to reduce his nitrogen rates, the main fertilizer that we put on to grow corn mainly, and also can be one of the biggest polluters if it's not treated correctly. But in this case here, the farmer can actually grow his own nitrogen because that is a legume. It takes nitrogen out of the air. So it's the management of these tools is what makes soil health, because you can't buy soil health. It's something that you have to manage. One of the challenges that I share with my farmer friends, uh, and this is just for your better understanding too, when you're talking to farmers, you need to treat your cover crops like your cash crops. Cover crops are a strong component of the soil health principles that we're using here. Keeping the soil covered. A cover crop is a plant that is not intended to be harvested or sold. It's intended to cover the soil, particularly over winter, hence the name cover crop. That's its purpose. Now, they can be dual purpose. Sometimes you can grow like a cereal rye. You can grow it over winter. It protects the soil. You have living roots in the soil. And then farmers who have animals may cut that or harvest it and use it then for forage. It's kind of a dual purpose. And that's perfectly acceptable in this context. So just a little definition of a cover crop, which is a key component of soil health. Now, for the farmers, some of the benefits are easy to see. I happen to be a vegetable farmer, and I grow these pumpkins for Whole Foods and a couple other stores. But these nice, clean pumpkins are a value added for me as a farmer because see how they grow on that nice bed of straw? See, I grew that in place, and then I rolled it down and then we planted direct seeded into there without tillage. And this whole value added component has really driven a lot of farmers to use this method because the pumpkins are cleaner. And we have regulations in place to help guide farmers in using their soil health principles. There is money out there with various government programs and various non-government programs to help farmers make a transition to this. But in this case here, farmers are growing this way because there's a value addedness to it. And I'm going to talk about some other things later on about how the market, or how some buyers for farmers products are now very much incentivizing farmers to use soil health practices. So that's pretty much my opening statement and just a background here. Now I want to talk about some of the practical stuff that I see as a farmer in talking about renting out the land, renting out, to to somehow come up with a lease and or a rental agreement that involves soil health. And there is no one size fits all. That's clear. But I hope to give you some ideas here that if you're in this situation or you're helping other farmers in this situation, that you can then use to help people figure out a very workable and a fair situation. So I want to talk about 5 tips on how to negotiate a lease that includes soil health principles. And you can see them right there. I'm going to go over them one by one in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, this is a survey that came out several years ago. It was a survey done by a couple different organizations. You can see them up there. What's important is there was one of the questions that was asked in the survey to farmers was a question: it does not make sense for me to use cover crops on land I rent. So they were asking farmers uh, the land that they rent, why would they want to use cover crops there? And I'll just explain the reason this question is out there. Because when you invest in soil health principles, cover crops in particular, it costs $10 to $20 an acre for the seed, and it may cost $10 to $20 an acre for the establishment of that cover crop. So you're looking at $20 to $40 an acre sometimes, extra expense for a farmer to employ some of these soil health principles. So right away, that is a something that you're going to want to talk about probably with the farmer and how that who should be paying for that, since the investment doesn't always come back to the farmer the first year. It may take years till they build up the soil health in their fields so they can actually see tangible benefits from it. So as you can see on this survey here, about half the farmers said it didn't make much difference. So that's interesting. And obviously you see a couple other viewpoints there and perspectives from others. But the whole point of this is to try to explain and get a handle on how do you determine a value of something that's kind of more like an investment. In other words, if you spend let's just say we spend $30 an acre for cover crops, do we get that $30 an acre back that year in that season? And the answer is maybe. I cannot say it's always a yes, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't get a bigger yield or a value out of it. Sometimes you get triple the value. So this is why this becomes a very valid question that we need to discuss. So a couple different landlords' approaches here and their perception of soil health, and where do you fit in? Or where does your landlord that you're relating to, where do they fit in? Because it's important to understand this, and they're very different. So the first one is those who support soil health principles, and they want soil health principles being used in their farm with cover crops, little or no tillage. That's the biggest one. Maybe more cropping, different crops in their rotation, mixed species cover crops, and you can kind of go on from there. So these people see the value of investing in their most valuable asset A lot of times it's their most valuable asset, the soil. And also, it's a compelling story to share, to tell their friends of what they're doing to keep their soil in place. The story of soil health is a compelling story. And when you might say, well, what is out there in that field that's green in December? Well, it could be a cash grain like wheat. It could be, but it could be a cover crop as well that is protecting the soil. And what I like to say to people who ask me, what is a cover crop? I use my own example here. I said, well, a cover crop is something I plant in the fall to keep nitrates out of the Chesapeake Bay and your groundwater. And as soon as I say that, I immediately connect with the person because I'm doing a good thing. People know that nitrates are bad when they're in water. Nitrates are actually good in the soil because they help the plants grow. Plants need nitrates. But when too many nitrates are in the water, we have problems, we have issues. So it's a compelling story. And I've heard more than once where landlords that were friendly, that kind of had this attitude here, they would brag to their friends, that there's maybe even pollinator plots or species planted to specifically attract insects that would help pollinate their crops or benefit in a way to be a predator to insects that are pests. So there's a lot of things going on here, but this story is a good story to tell. It's very compelling to tell when you do it. So then we have the other side, and this is those who did not support soil health. And sometimes it's just because of being naive. Or they just don't know. They just don't understand that there's this soil health component. I mean, the way I farmed 30 and 40 years ago, I would be appalled to farm that way now. But I wasn't intentionally trying to rape the earth back then. It's just what we knew. It's like, I'll just use the analogy of an automobile. 30, 40, 50 years ago, the fuel efficiency was terrible compared to now. The safetiness was not near as good. Is that because we were intentionally doing that? No, it's what we knew at the time. And that's why I believe we're living in exciting times now because we've learned a lot. And I got to say, who knows what we'll be talking about 20 to 30 years in the future. I'm sure some of the very things we're doing now will be totally outdated. But anyway, so you have some landowners who do not support soil health. It's not that they don't like it. A lot of times it's just being naive. They may be uncomfortable with the traditional clean field approach. They want the field clean, nothing growing in there except the cash crop, and that has been a tradition. It literally is a tradition that some people don't want any green in their field except cash crops. So that's just a mindset that we have to work with. And then then we kind of have another category here that might fit a little bit more with the second one I said, but it's the landowners who it's like all about the money. Who can I rent to and get paid the highest return per acre? Who's going to give me $20 more an acre or whatever? So you have that, and they don't care so much about how their land is taken care of, but they're more concerned about the money. That's a very short-term view, and because I feel that as we move forward, as you're going to see here as I get to the back end of my talk, there's opportunities out there if we take care of our soil from even a marketing standpoint. So just a little example I gave here, a cover cropping tenant plants cover crops for a few years. So in this time, he's building the soil up. When you plant cover crops, multiple years, your organic matter starts to increase. So you have organic matter can hold more nutrients at that point. So it becomes more valuable. Well, a neighbor might notice that, a neighboring farmer, and he'll go in and say, I'll offer the landowner $50 an acre more because they know that that previous farmer or the existing farmer was literally banking nutrients with cover crops. This has happened. I've heard these stories. And this is why long-term leases are really important to defend against this. So if you're working with someone or you're someone that's all about the money, I would ask you or challenge you to reconsider that, to think about the real value that you may be losing out here in that. So, okay, I said five things we're going to talk about here, and this has more now to do with the actual communication with your farmer that you're talking to. How do you talk to a farmer? I have a whole talk on that, how to talk to farmers and be able to connect. But I'll share some of those things here. So number one, and a lot of this is simply just people skills, communication skills. But here I'll give you some specifics. So if we're talking to the farmer, let's just use a scenario that this farmer hasn't been really farming in a way that was in that soil health, using soil health principles. Yeah, he might be no-till, which is one, but he's not using any cover crops. My opinion is if you no-till, you have to use cover crops. That's where I'm coming from. So, what are the shared goals? And this is always a good place to start in a conversation. Nobody's going to contend that increased organic matter is a bad thing, but this is what you can get out of using cover crops and less tillage or no tillage. Of course, less soil or erosion. Sometimes there's flagrant issues with that, where you till up the whole hillside and hoping that you don't get a deluge of a rainstorm, and then you happen to get that, and there's soil all over the roads, or there's ditches like I showed you at the beginning. Nobody likes that. Everybody wants more resilient soils. And even for farmers and landowners too, can sometimes, depending on how active they are, is herbicide resistant weeds. That's something that farmers need to deal with here in the last 10 or 15 years. So all these issues can be addressed with using soil health principles. So that's a good foundation to start off. But the question, do cover crops pay, is the biggest question, the most frequent question that farmers ask. And because, as I said earlier, it's an expense. So this is where you as a landlord or landowner may have to chip in a little bit if you want to help. And it does depend on your farmer. There are some farmers who they're, for whatever reason, they're committed to soil health principles. They're going to do it no matter what. And then you have other farmers say, well, I'm not going to spend $20, $30 an acre in cover crop seeds if the landowner doesn't help me out. So that has to be a discussion there. And this is why I say long-term lease is highly recommended. 5, 10 years. You can develop all kinds of clauses in that and so forth. But I have heard one example. This might work for some of you in your situations where the landlord agreed to pay for 1 or 2 or 3 years of cover crop seeds in the establishment, or reduce the rent a little bit over a period of time, usually not more than 5 years, maybe 3 years is enough in order to do that. I've heard of leases also that were structured that the farmer pays everything up front, and if the lease is broken, that the landlord would refund the cost of the cover crop seeds. That's a little trickier because you're going to have to trust the landlord that they're honest about doing that. But some sort of agreement there with these cover crops are important. I would say that if you do have a 10-year lease, that's probably enough. That you don't need to do much more specific, but it's going to come down to each person and what they want to do. So number 2 is show the value of soil health. The landowner needs to be convinced of the value. You can't just say, well, I just heard this webinar and I want you to plant cover crops. Well, that's a good starting point, but depending what farmer you're going to talk about, they may resist a little bit at that and say, what do you think you're talking about? Those cover crops don't pay. And trust me, farmers do say that, and some some it's actually true simply because they don't know how to manage them. So you gotta understand the dynamics behind this. Now here is where, when we start showing the value, this is where you're going to have to draw upon your people skills, because some farmers, they don't take very much information from anybody that's not a farmer. And so I would suggest that if you're not a farmer and you don't, understand a lot about uh, farmers' day-to-day lives and what they do and everything, just be a little careful here. Obviously, if you're the landowner, you're going to be holding the purse strings, so to speak, on who you want to come in there. But if you really like your farmer and he's a good guy to work with, having this conversation here is going to be very, very important. If you can ask them if they've seen, the earthworms, uh, where cover crops were and where they weren't. And again, you're gonna have to discover if they use cover crops or not. Here's a tactic that I've used, because I do a lot of public speaking and I get around the nation and even the world to some extent. When I come into a new area and I'm really not sure the extent of soil health practices, I'll ask someone, maybe privately before the meeting. I'll say, "So, does anybody use cover crops around here?" And that's a good icebreaker type questions, just to hear who it might be. It may be the very person you're talking to. Instead of saying, "Do you use cover crops?" I always say, "Does anybody use cover crops around here?" So if you're the landowner talking to your farmer, you might say, "Hey, did you ever try cover crops?" And they may give you a grand success story or a miserable failure. You can be prepared for any of that because it's out there. There are some people who have failed miserably at cover crops. Cover crops are a tool. You got to know how to use it. I use the example of a hammer. Put a hammer in my hands and I will not be able to build a house. I'm not a carpenter. Is it the hammer's fault? No. I'm not a good manager when it comes to a hammer. Give me a torch or a welder and I could do decent. So it's just an example there. So in talking to farmers, farmers are intrigued by the biological process. They may not know much about it, but if you study a little bit or even go to some farmer meetings sometimes, if you have time to do it and you're really serious, just to hear what farmers are talking about. Of course, plenty of stuff on the internet you can check, as far as this goes. But trying to connect here was what I'm trying to do. So number 3 is effective communication. Again, almost everything I'm saying here is about communication, but strategically, effective communication needs to happen throughout the year, not just at the time when you receive the rent check or whatever. Having that key relationship is critical if you want to move the farmer to doing some of the soil health principles that you would like. Explain why you want soil health principles. Take advantage of a teachable moment. And I just put some examples here. Again, this gets a little tricky. Uh, you could actually, if your farmer tried something, let's say maybe it was the first year he planted cover crops and you had a big rain event and the soil was covered or he did no-till, and you could say, "I really appreciate that because I can see that my soil didn't wash away at this rainstorm." So just trying to take note of things like that. Um, One thing I'll tell you, I'm speaking as a farmer here now, is when you talk to a farmer, regardless if you call them up on the phone or you stop in, always ask, "Is this a good time?" Farmers we work hard. We work long hours a lot of times, especially during harvest. Not all the time. I'm not complaining, but I love what I do. But respect a farmer's time. Always ask, "Do you have a minute?" Even when you call, just to respect their time. There's nothing that annoys me more than someone that's just rambling on and I'm busy. I got stuff that got to be done. There's going to be rain tonight. I got to get this done. These are the things we deal with. But so respect a farmer's time will score you some brownie points in that regard. Um, okay, number 4, follow up. answer questions. If a farmer's intrigued by what you want to do, let's just, they're just not sure, uh, you know, and if they ask you a question, you don't know the answer, say, I'll try to get back to you. Always ask the farmer too, is there someone else in the area here that's doing what I'm talking about? And they may know of a farmer and they may go even talk to that farmer because farmers generally enjoy sharing with one another their information with this type of thing, generally so. Make a point to keep the soil health discussion active as long as it's appropriate. And you're going to have to you're going to have to decide that. So now my last point here, and then get ready for some questions coming up. I'm going to pause here in a couple minutes. So absentee landlords, this is where you have someone that owns the land. They may live 100 miles away or further, and you never hardly ever meet them. You just send them a check at the end of the year, or you're working with a farmer that just sends you a check at the end of the year. Again, communicate as much as possible, phone, email, whatever. It is a challenge sometimes, specifically if you want to change their practices. Very difficult to do. Another thing here is and this again, if you have the respect of the farmer, if they're genuinely interested, send them web links, articles of some of the things you have in mind that you would like them to be done. Again, be very, very careful that you don't just try to ram something down their throats because they don't, the farmers, as all people don't enjoy that. Could be something about the merits of cover crops, a story about the benefits of cover crops for farmers, just that kind of thing. But it's more important that you keep the communication going in a respectful way. Um, I don't have a slide for this here this evening, but it may be that you need to look for another farmer. And there's a lot of areas of the country. There's farmers around that will probably be close to what you're doing. Now, depends on how specific you are, what exactly you want to what degree you want to do can make a big difference. But there is farmers around, and I'm gonna go to one more slide here before we pause. And I would just say that I have been, as a farmer, the beneficiary of landowners who have contacted me. So I'm not that big of a farmer. I'm in last year we farmed 300 acres, but I have had now over the last 10 years, I've had 5 landowners contact me. Some of the people I didn't even know, but within a few miles of our farm, 5 landowners. Again, not a lot of acreage, total 95 acres, but they basically said, "We want you want me to farm their land because we know that you could take care of it. We like what we see." Now, I have been using soil health principles very intentionally for the last 25 years and even before that. So it does take some time. But to have 5 individual landowners contact us is very significant. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not, if you're a landowner, what I will say is look for the farmers in the area that are doing a good job that you might trust and so forth. So I call that, from a farmer's perspective, that's soil health perks. So I really think that is something you might want to consider doing if the farmer you're working with just isn't cutting it. I was doing a little research working for another outfit. Actually, had to partly do with Stroud, which is funding this here, part of this webinar today. And we had a farmer that was involved in it was a rental situation. And after I met him, I told the other folks there, this isn't going to work. He doesn't understand what we're talking about. And so we had to get another farmer in there that clearly knew and actually was excited to try some stuff that we were doing on this other farm. So that's what can happen out there. Okay, I'm going to pause a little bit. I don't want you to hold back here, but just unmute yourself. Is there any question that you might have? about anything I discussed here. Any question that maybe should get clarification, or some things you think I may have missed. I do have some more slides yet. I'm not finished, but just want to take a little break here. So, or anything you might want to confirm that you liked. I'll take that as well, of course. So anybody have a comment?
Yes,
Anybody?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It has to do with how do you phrase the question, or how do you open up the conversation to gauge whether or not you're working with somebody who's a good farmer if you don't necessarily have a sense of kind of what you're asking. If it's hard to articulate, what are some questions that you would suggest that somebody ask to start to gauge that about the people that they're already working with?
So you're saying that you have a landowner who wants to start basically opening up a discussion with a farmer. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, if you own land, there's a chance that there's somebody that you're already working with, and let's
Mm-hmm.
assume that you think that they're a pretty good farmer,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you have a working relationship with them already.
Mm-hmm.
You know, since you're starting out with as a landowner with kind of a basic idea or
Mm-hmm.
questions about your own land, like how do you approach that conversation with somebody?
Well, I would first, observe everything you can about what that farmer is already doing. And I know some landowners are pretty cognizant about what farmers do, and others just aren't, and that's okay. So, if I was the landowner, let's just say that I'm pretty much an average non-farmer. I know a little bit, but not much. I might know what a cover crop is. I think I might know, or might not really know what no tillage actually involves. I would ask those questions. So, how important is it that you're using cover crops? And just kind of ask somewhat open-ended questions in order to hear where they're coming from. I mean, I guess it's a little hard for me to step in that landowner's shoes in this case because I am a farmer and I would know the exact questions to ask. But to help those who are asking their farmers, I would just have that conversation, and how important is cover crops? And because if they say, well, I think cover crops are great, but they're too expensive. Well, okay, maybe we can do something about that. Try to get a feel for where they're at. I think that's what I would try to get at, is where are they at with this whole soil health paradigm? Are they serious about it? Or are they thinking about it? Or they really don't know much? Most farmers now know about soil health. I like to say that farmers are primed like never before because we see it in all our magazines, at our meetings. It's there. Um, you pretty much have to be living in a cave almost not to hear about soil health nowadays, figuratively speaking, in the farming community. So I guess, Jen, I would try to find out um, where they're at with this soil health paradigm and the practices, and maybe where they want to go. Because sometimes I know it's very common for farmers to farm rented land differently than owned land for reasons that we talked about. You might ask the question, so do you use cover crops on your land that you own? That may be a clue. So I don't know. Am I getting anywhere there, Jen? Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
All
you.
right.
And I just
All
want to
right.
point out, so people can unmute themselves. You can use the chat box if you're more comfortable kind of engaging that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll ask one more question and then I'll stop talking. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of how long did it take you to see results from cover
Mm-hmm.
crops and reducing tillage and no tillage on your farm?
So that's a very good question because I have to answer it two ways. When I first started, and I indicated at the beginning here, I started in 1982. It was 3 years. It was exactly 3 years when I noticed a difference in the soil. The thing about it is I didn't expect to see a difference because nobody told me I was going to expect it. Now, if we fast forward to present, with all that I know and we know collectively as farmers, you can see a difference year one if you do it right and if you use all the tools that are available to us right now. Some soils could be some exceptions to that. But if you know what you're looking for, you know what you're doing, you can see a fairly, I'm going to say, an immediate result. But to start getting the payback, the actual more resilient soil, because your organic matter increases, and a lot of it hinges on organic matter. So when you start increasing organic matter, that's when things start to happen, and that may not happen significantly for 5 to 10, maybe 15 years in. So you hear 15 years and you're like, oh wow, that's just so long. I can't even, I can't wait for that. Who knows if I'll still be alive or whatever. I hear all these questions sometimes or comments, but the reality of it is, it took us, 30, 40, 50 years or 150 years to degrade our soils like they are today. We can't build them back in 5 years. So it does take some time. So yeah, just unmute yourself if you can. Just go ahead and ask the question or type something in the chat. We'll pause for a couple more minutes before we go on, and we'll stop at the end too.
Steve, I have a question. This is Elizabeth Beggins. I'm with the Million Acre Challenge in
Good.
Maryland. We've had some conversations around transitioning from the focus being on yield to the focus being on resilience and profitability.
Yep.
And you've kind of used both of those things so far in your presentation. And
Yep.
I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit and whether you think that's plausible. What do we think it would take for landowners or for farmers to start paying attention to that instead of the almighty holy grail of yield?
Well, here's the reason why that's a mindset issue. It's a whole lot funner, if I can use that word, to go to the coffee shop and brag about your yields than it is to talk about your profit per acre. That's just two different vibes going on there. And I will say this, and I say this as a farmer: the fear of losing yield is a powerful incentive not to take any chances to lose that yield. But the fear of losing profit, it's there, but it's just not as dynamic. You would think it should be the profit, because that is what gets us to go farm again next year. But I see this starting to develop more and more about profitability. It's becoming more talked about, and more farmers are saying, no, I don't have the highest yields, but I have more profit per acre. And so to your point, I'm glad that you brought that up. I am absolutely all about profit per acre, or you could even say profit per farm. The overall farm profit is clearly the primary objective, and I should say mindset, that farmers should be doing. So I'm totally in that camp, and I appreciate you doing it. I'm not going to be making record yields here in my farm. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to eke out a living, number one, and also in the context of environmental responsibility. Doesn't mean that high yields are bad. I'll say that, because we do have to push for high yields again to remain profitable. So there's a ditch on either side of the road here with this conversation. But I will also say that we really should be looking at profitability more. But it is a mindset, Elizabeth, that we're fighting. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll gradually start to shift that focus a little bit.
Well, keep it up, what you're doing, because I think that needs to be. I'm totally in that.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Other questions or comments? Anybody? Feel free to speak up. Love to hear your thoughts. Anything to share? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi Steve. Hey, this is Chuck and Nikita in Texas. Hey, look, we're looking to basically take 4 or 5 acres just to start a process of trying to regenerate the soil. So with a small, small parcel like that, what's our first step? And what would you say we would do? I mean, we're growing coastal on it now.
Mhm.
What would be that step? Because we have no problem, partitioning that off so we can start the process. We just want to
Yeah.
understand the process of how to
Yep.
make,
Yep.
what would you suggest we start with?
Well, my first piece of advice, and I don't know where you're at in all this, is to learn all you can. Number one, learn all you can about what you can do, preferably in your region. See, if you would be my neighbor here in Pennsylvania, that's where I'm from. I could tell you, here's some things that we found to work here that are pretty good. You're in Texas,
Yes, yeah.
and so I don't know. Do you have people that you trust that are kind of in front of that are doing what you want to accomplish? I always say you need to find a mentor or mentors, or somebody out there, preferably in your geographical region, and go to meetings, go to field days, learn all you can. It's not easy. I will be the first to say that this whole soil health thing is you need to embrace another level of management. And some people think, well, I'm going to buy a bag of cover crop seed and put it out there, and I'm going to be a cover crop farmer. I'm going to put a no-till coulter on my planter, and I'm going to be a no-till farmer. Well, okay, that's part of it. So I'm sorry. I would feel a little remiss if I would give you specific advice for
Sure.
Texas.
No, it's not a problem.
Um,
Not a problem. I just,
yeah,
we want to kind of get started, right? We want to
yeah,
understand. So we look back a
yeah,
couple years from now and says, okay, let's
yeah,
adjust that, and then let's go and take a bigger
yeah.
parcel, start the same process.
Yeah. So some of the principles are really come down to trying to mimic nature as much as possible. And that is growing year round. Yes, even in Texas. I don't know what part of Texas you're from, if I may ask.
We're in Houston County. It's basically northeastern Texas. Yeah, north central eastern. So East
Okay.
County would be a general term.
You got decent amount of rain where you're
Oh
at,
yeah, yeah,
probably.
yeah. No, we have plenty of rain. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, try to keep something living year round. Try to keep the soil covered. Try to disturb the soil as least as possible. That's your three main principles. The fourth
Okay.
one then is diversity. Mix it up, and if you're really brave and ambitious, get some animals in the mix there. Uh, so then you
Yeah,
really
no, yeah,
got a
we
good
can do that as
system.
well. Yeah, so we can do that as well. Okay, good.
All right,
That's good.
all right. So there you go.
Okay,
There's
good.
a few things. Maybe that'll get some discussion going for you this evening.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate
Okay.
it.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions or comments? Anybody? Anything you think I missed that I should have shared? I do have a few more things yet, but okay, I'm going to move on. We'll stop again at the end, but our time is rapidly coming to a close here. So I want to just breeze through the end here. This is kind of a nuance here of what I see where the future is going. And it's just something to consider. I feel like I have a front row seat here because I am a vegetable farmer and I'm working with various companies that are actually, you could say, rewarding for growing things in a regenerative way. So, what's the factors that are going to influence cover crop adoption moving forward? Is it going to be regulations? Nobody likes regulations. We know we got to have a few, but nobody likes them. Or is it the market, the people you sell to? And I'm going to give you some examples here of what I see coming up. And this is important because this is an opportunity for some. So I've been a consultant for Wrangler Jeans, and you're like, what? Wrangler Jeans? How can a guy from Pennsylvania do that? Well, it's just about the principles and everything of soil health and using cover crops and no-till and essentially growing cotton in a regenerative way. And Wrangler has had the foresight to actually promote a brand that they have called Rooted Collection. And basically, it is specific farms that use no-till and cover crops to grow cotton that they will then turn into blue jeans. Look it up if you want. Rooted Collection, Wrangler Jeans. You can see the stories about these farms, and people pay $99 a pair. Um, I do have a pair, but that's because they gave them to me. I work with them. But this is an opportunity that I see broadening to other aspects of agriculture. I just wanted to share it with you. Actually went to Greece here at a big show here this past winter, trying to talk to farmers over there. So Wrangler is, of course, an international presence. And I just want to show you this, that what is out there. This is what's going to cause farmers that have not jumped on the soil health bandwagon to maybe take a second look, because look at all these companies here who have some sort of a soil health sustainability plan. You'll recognize some of them. You won't all, but there's some big names right there, huge names, worldwide players. And they're still the formative stage, but I worked with several of these here, and I know that the direction we're headed is that eventually I think most all farmers will have to demonstrate in some form or fashion that there's some sort of soil health principle they're using even in growing corn and soybeans. I've had ADM, Archer Daniel Midland, the largest buyer of soybeans in the world, attend one of my sessions in Indiana. And I asked them, and I saw their shirts, I saw their logos on their shirts. I asked them in the middle of my talk, I said, what are you guys doing here at a soil health meeting? And they kind of sheepishly said, oh, we're here to learn about cover crops and soil health and how that may fit in the future. Well, the room got pretty quiet, honestly, because the fact that a big, huge company like that was attending a soil health meeting made a pretty loud statement. But as I said before, the story of cover crops, the story of soil health, keeping the pollution out of the water, is a compelling story to the general public, and I think this will continue to influence the use of soil health principles, and especially for landowners, they want to see the soil covered. And where I'm from in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, lots of small farms. Of course, if you know anything about Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, lots of Amish, and that's why a lot of the farms are smaller. But this picture was taken the first week of December a few years ago. It's 65% cover crop, a lot of green out there, and that's mainly because of the Chesapeake Bay awareness. 20, 30 years ago, and now the results are in. And by the way, the water quality in the Chesapeake Bay is starting to improve. So I think got a long way to go yet, but things are happening. The whole thing about making soil health pay, again, is one of the biggest barriers. I say this, and this is mainly directed to farmers, but the profit is in the management. The profit is in the management of understanding these soil health principles. And I'll just say too that this is kind of almost the same way of saying it, but totally different. Cover crops make good farmers better and bad farmers worse. And part of the reason for that statement is it's the level of management that it requires. I wanted to share too here as I wrap up here. I'm about ready to release a book I wrote. They're called The Future Proof Farm. Gives a lot of stories in there, some of the companies I've worked with, and some of the things I'm doing on my own farm here. Subtitles: Changing Mindsets in a Changing World. That's going to be out here in about 6 weeks. If you're interested in looking more about it and seeing the different reviews and the foreword that Wrangler wrote for me, pretty honored about that. Go to stevegroff.com and check that out. So appreciate Jen is on a call here. She gave me a really nice testimonial there in the bottom. So it's been something that's I've wanted to do for a while, and it's just to be able to help farmers understand where the future's going, be able to help non-farmers get a window into a farmer's life, and so forth. But I just want to wrap this up before we have just a couple minutes for questions. Soil health, it's our future. This is my granddaughter. This is a very almost emotional moment for me, showing her first earthworm. They live a little ways away from us, but they were here last fall, and she was so intrigued by that earthworm. It's a little hard to see in the picture. You got to look close, but it's there. That is our future, and not only with the next generation, but I feel that is part of our future. So End of my slideshow. Just want to open it up if there's any more questions that anybody might have quick. So I'm asking, I see Elizabeth asked a question here on the chat. Is Wrangler paying the rooted farmers more for their products? Here's the answer to that, and it's a long-winded answer, but I'm going to keep it short. The short answer is no. They are not paying a bonus. What Wrangler is doing, and I know because I was there, is they are doing research for cover crops and no-till and cotton. I was actually in their research fields. I was at their research farm in North Carolina. So Wrangler is spending their money on research. I'll say to help farmers do this. So General Mills is another example. They are not giving their farmers a premium. General Mills has poured out over, I think it's $5 million at least now, $5 million for soil health research. So that's kind of the way these corporations are going at it. I as a farmer, you kind of think, well, I'd like the bonus, but the reality, this is where these corporations seem to be going with this. So, so that's the answer on that, Elizabeth. So, is there one or two more questions that we might have? Anybody? Anything else, Jen, that from you that we should cover here, other than I guess everybody will get informed when our next webinar is next week, I believe, or whenever it's at.
Yep, I will send out a reminder for the next webinars that are coming up, and also a link to a survey. I think it's Farm Journal that's looking for feedback from landowners to get a sense of what they're looking for. So I'll send that out in a link with that reminder.
Alrighty, and I think in a day or two or whenever we'll send out this this webinar. We did record it, so I appreciate everybody joining us tonight. I hope it was helpful, and look forward to seeing you soon again. So thanks all who joined, and we'll see you soon again.